Welcome to the CPRE Knowledge Hub series on educational labor markets, problems, mechanisms, and solutions. I'm Peter Goff, a professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and today I'm joined by Matthew Springer, a professor at Vanderbilt University and the director of the National Center on Performance Incentives. Hi, Matt. Thanks for joining me today.
How you doing, Peter? Thanks for having me.
What are the problems that pay for performance is intended to address?
That's a great one. And I tend to describe this in two ways. I think first is from a broad conceptual perspective. Many are going to contend that the American education system is in crisis, and that behavioral incentives for educators and students is really this cost-effective strategy to improve not only system performance, but increase student achievement as well. And we really see that from what I would say are theories of human performance, generally speaking here, that incentive pay can serve as a powerful motivational incentive to increase student learning and encourage teachers to try new practices, do things differently within the classroom, even though we haven't seen much of a response there in some of our work. But then the second component becomes what I call that compositional effect. And we're really here, we're saying that incentive pay system, who is it most likely to attract into the profession? Those who are most likely to be rewarded under the metered activity. Who is it? It's going to retain our highest performers, those who are most likely to be rewarded under the activity. But it also sends a signal to lower performing teachers, either saying, hey, we need to do something differently here in order to get your level of performance up to a point where we're satisfied with it. Or it might send a signal and say, hey, this might not be the occupation for you. And this is the interesting piece of some of what we're seeing a little bit in Tennessee here, is that those mechanisms are at play. We're seeing the higher performers retained, but at the same time, we're seeing the lower performers pushed out, but they're not leaving the profession per se. They're actually being hired into non-performance pay schools. And so we have to be careful about when these policies are put in place, is all these mechanisms working at once, or are there some of these unintended consequences that we might not be thinking about?
Value-added student test scores has been a primary component of a lot of pay-for-performance systems. It's to what extent did your students grow on a certain achievement test? Why do you think in education we tend to be so focused on creating these objective measures and so fearful of this term subjective?
We definitely are. I think a little bit reluctant to use some of those subjective measures. I think one of the major pushes that we use student test scores and what we're going to say is an objective measure of teacher performance is that student test scores have been around for quite a while. They've been in place. Yes, value added is a controversial measure, but test scores are readily available. They're sitting there. And as a result, we're quick to connect that to evaluating teachers. And I think it's really critical as we look at the future of incentive pay programs, pay for performance, that we begin thinking about a larger, more comprehensive system that we use to evaluate teachers and reward those bonuses. And I think we need to get into the objective measures, right? Classroom observation provides very useful information. And there's a huge advantage to it, too, that you can do classroom observation at multiple points throughout the year, where a test score in mathematics is on May 15th of this at the end of the school year, and it captures one point in time.
When you think about the research you've done and the research you've read, what one statistic or finding jumps out to you as being particularly problematic or alarming?
Educational Evaluation and Policy Analysis, which is one of the flagship policy analysis journals for the American Educational Research Association. They recently published a paper that I did with two outstanding graduate students, Walker Swain and Luis Rodriguez. And in that paper, we evaluated the Tennessee governor's highly effective teacher retention bonus program. And the way the program was designed is they identified in the state their priority schools, which is the lowest 5% of schools in the state according to an accountability metric. And then they said, if you're highly effective according to the state's teacher evaluation system, meaning that you rank at level 5 based upon classroom observation scores, individual level value added, school level value added, and a couple other metrics, that will give you a $5,000 retention bonus if you return to a priority school the following year. And what we actually found from this study is that the predicted probability of retention increased by 20% for those highest performing teachers when we compared them to level 4 teachers, those just below that level 5 threshold. And while I think that finding in and of itself is pretty interesting, there's a descriptive component that came from our work that I find to be the most interesting of all. And that is the typical teacher who was retained as a result of these retention bonuses was at the 84th percentile of the teacher performance distribution, meaning that they're incredibly high performing. Yet the average teacher that was hired to replace a teacher that exited was at the 25th percentile of the teacher performance distribution. And so we see, just based upon this single program, that the teacher that's likely to be retained at the 85th percentile versus the teacher who is likely to fill in if that teacher is not retained is at the 25th percentile. We see a huge 1.64 standard deviation difference in their quality. And as we begin to think about ways in which we need to reduce the inequities in our system, when I see a statistic like that, and I see something as simple and clear as students are now going to be coming into contact with a low performer because there's exit, that to me is probably the most alarming statistic that I have seen lately.
So when you're in the media a lot, you talk with legislators, you're building policy. As you're part of these conversations, what do you find to be some of the biggest misconceptions?
So I think actually one of the biggest misconceptions is that we have a teacher shortage. And what I mean by that is that it's not a teacher shortage across the board. We have a teacher shortage in select schools, and we have a teacher shortage in select disciplines. And so we need to begin thinking more strategically about talking about these issues, because saying we have a teacher shortage is just not necessarily correct. We have a teacher shortage when it comes to mathematics teachers, when it comes to science teachers, when it comes to special education teachers, and when it comes to hard to staff school settings.
This is wonderful, Matt. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Pete. It's great to catch up.